I've had some comments on a few different platforms now about, well, why do we even care that COVID has been downgraded from a BSL-3 down to a BSL-2? Because these are just biosafety levels for laboratories, so that doesn't have any impact to the general public. Well, no, that's not true. And the big deal comes into play when you think about the context of this decision. And when the CDC releases guidelines saying that COVID can now be considered a biosafety level 2, which means less stringent precautions, it makes several big statements. But first, let's talk about the difference between BSL-2 and BSL-3. So for BSL-2, which is the lower precautionary level, you are using personal protective equipment such as lab coats, gloves, eye protection, and in some cases face shields. But note that there are no respirator uses required in that level, where the main precautionary measure is using the biosafety cabinets for the tests, where BSL-3, which is the heightened precautionary level, includes things like wearing goggles, in addition to a respirator call-out. You're required to wear scrub suits, and most importantly, there's an airflow requirement, where there is negative pressure that is pulling air out of the lab, so that it's not allowed to recirculate within the clean room. Now, as COVID is infectious as it aerosolizes, this is something that is highly important, but again is not required at the BSL-2 level, which means that at this lower level of precautions, the BSL-2 laboratory personnel are more likely to be infected with what they're handling, because COVID just doesn't stop being an aerosol because it got lowered to this lower level. So now that we have a better understanding of this, how does it impact the general public? The first obvious thing is that if laboratory personnel are infected by COVID that they're handling in the lab, they would then be taking this COVID that they were infected with outside of the lab into the public environment, in which case they would be directly infecting other members of the public with this virus. But the much more significant impact to the public is what this change communicates. By reclassifying COVID SARS-CoV-2 from BSL-3 down to BSL-2, the CDC is clearly communicating to scientists and the public that, hey, we don't think COVID is as bad as it used to be. This is a direct commentary through policy. They're saying, one, that they only believe that current COVID causes mild to moderate human disease, where they're completely ignoring long COVID and the impacts of repeated infection over time, which also completely ignores the fact that it is very deadly in certain people. Where the ultimate takeaway is that they're saying that the risk level of SARS-CoV-2 is lower. That's what's being communicated through this change. And why is that important? Well, that's going to impact public policy. What we've been hearing in the news media is things like, oh, COVID is progressively becoming milder over time. Well, now the scientists can point to the CDC and say, yeah, the CDC even agrees with us. They reclassified COVID from a BSL-3 to a BSL-2. And then you're going to have lawmakers that go, well, hey, COVID is now milder, the CDC says so we're going to reduce the restrictions. And then this becomes used as a justification for other policies. The most obvious one would be something like a mask ban, because masks aren't required, respirators aren't required at the BSL-2 level. So if COVID is no longer a BSL-3, where respirators were required, and it's now a BSL-2, why would people need to mask? If people directly handling the virus in a lab don't need to mask, why should the public? This is the type of context that is surrounding a decision like this, and this is why it is so impactful and so important.